We will stay with that issue. The Liberal Party's decision this week on whether to dump or to keep a commitment to net zero will quite literally be make or break. A new report from the Salvation Army says that after housing costs, power bills are now the biggest source of financial stress for struggling Australians. And hardly a surprise, given poll after poll's made it clear the cost of living is the number 1, 2 and 3 issue for Australians, with concerns about climate change now absolutely down the list. Especially as people understand more and more that climate action means pain for them without making a skerrick of difference to global emissions anyway. It's this collision with the facts, pain for households and planet futility, that the Liberals need to resolve this week, because they cannot be a credible alternative if their pitch is just, we'll do net zero, but we'll just do it better than Labor. Because if they were smart, they would see dumping net zero as a massive political opportunity, which undeniably it is. Never forget the insanity that is Labor's energy policy. Labor is subsidising renewables to drive their take-up, but then it's got to subsidise consumers to avoid bill shock, and then it subsidises coal-fired power stations to keep the lights on and subsidises industry so they don't go to the wall. Now, this is madness. But the coalition can hardly oppose it without also opposing the net zero straitjacket that's driving it. And yes, as climate crusader Chris Bowen endlessly repeats, the sun and the wind, they don't send you a power bill. Sure, but power companies do. They absolutely do. And those prices have gone up 24% on average just the past year alone. Because the infrastructure to capture those renewables, well, that has to be paid for. So too the new transmission lines to get it from where it happens to be generated to where you need it. That has to be paid for, as well as the firming needed to keep the lights on when we don't have wind or at night when we haven't got the sun. That has to be paid for too. And if the Libs say they oppose Labor's 2030 and 2035 emissions reduction targets, but then still support net zero, they'll have to explain how they'll make even harsher and deeper cuts later in the decade. And if the Libs say they oppose net zero by 2050 but still support it as an aspiration, well, they're still going to have to say how they're going to achieve that aspiration. Otherwise, what's the point of even having one? Over the weekend, so-called moderate Libs, so these are lefty Liberals, well, they cranked up their fight to keep at least a watered-down version of net zero in their official policy. Frontbencher Andrew Bragg even threatened to resign if net zero went ahead. Now, I know that he meant that as some sort of threat, but from where I sit, tell you what, that's a bloody incentive. Bragg and his type say the Liberals need net zero to win back Teal seats. But for the past 2 elections, they have had net zero. They have basically Me Too Labor on all of this climate madness, and yet they've ended up losing the greatest number of Liberal seats in history. They have done precisely what Bragg says they must do, and it's been a train wreck. So explain to me how keeping it will save them. How will Me Tooing Labor help when Me Tooing Labor is the very reason they've had 2 catastrophic election losses? Honestly, what don't these people get? Now they're working themselves into a lather over pulling out of Paris, with Bragg saying it would make Australia, he says, a pariah state.
We have to be in Paris, and we can't be a pariah state. I mean, we're better than Iran and Syria, and we're a serious country, and the Australian people expect us to take emissions reduction seriously. They believe in climate change. We believe in climate change.
So a pariah state, what, like America, with energy about 1/3 of the cost of Australia? Today, his fellow Teal Liberal, Maria Kovacek, chimed in.
So when I'm talking to people in Bradfield, in Bennelong, in Warringah, in Wentworth, in Reed, in Hughes, in Banks, they are telling me that they want to see credible action on climate.
Well, here's where that good senator needs to do a bit of her homework. And rather than just trot out those talking points from the Liberal left, I suggest she picks up the Paris Agreement and actually reads it. Because it's more than possible to dump net zero without leaving the Paris Agreement, because Paris does not I'll repeat this for her again, Paris does not even use the term net zero. What's more, it's a non-binding document and only commits signatories to, quote, achieve a balance between anthropogenic emissions and removals by sinks of greenhouse gases in the second half of this century. The second half of this century, that's right. The target in the Paris Agreement is not net zero by 2050 at all. That is not there. Indeed, what's in there is just an aim for carbon neutrality by 2099. Now, the other thing Senator Kovacic needs to know, given she's only been in the Parliament as a Liberal for about 2 minutes, is that when we signed the Paris Agreement, the commitment Australia made was to cut emissions by between 26 and 28% by 2030, something we have already achieved some time back. And it was made on the basis that it could be achieved without new policy and without new spending. And I know this because I was there at the time. The then Prime Minister actually wrote on the Cabinet minutes, so the Cabinet document, he wrote that Australia's accession to this international agreement was on the basis that other countries would make comparable emissions cuts. And what? Almost none of them have done that. Honestly, I feel like the Liberal Party hasn't got the intellectual grunt to wrestle their way out of a paper bag at the moment. Now, none of this should be as hard as some are trying to make it. For 2 elections, the Liberals have copied Labor on climate policy, and for 2 elections, it has been a catastrophe. Look at the scoreboard. So how about you stop following Labor and you might fight them instead? How about that? Fighting Labor. Gee, that's a revelation. That's how John Howard and Tony Abbott won landslides. Who knows? Might actually work for you again. And what have you got to lose anyway, given the Liberal primary vote's a dismal 24% and supporters are quitting the party in droves? I mean, here is the political reality for those too blind to see it. Labor is hurting. Labor is bleeding on cost of living. People are doing it tough. Inflation's on the march again. Wage growth is sluggish. Productivity stagnant. Immigration's out of control, making housing access more and more difficult. And Labor want to make it even worse by going even harder on climate policy, changing the cars we're allowed to drive, hitting agriculture, carpeting the land with solar panels and wind turbines, spending billions and billions bailing out companies they are making go bust with their power costs. Now, right now, the Liberals can't fight Labor on any of this because they're joined at the hip with Labor on net zero. Can you imagine if they were not? Imagine if they could take the gloves off and expose the whole net zero scam for what it is. The billions in subsidies to all these foreign players, the national parks and farmland under threat from renewables, the colossal waste of your money as taxpayers. It would only take a half-competent opposition to beat Chris Bowen in a political contest over net zero, given the policy's a dog and he's very obviously the government's weakest link. This is why Labor's trying so hard to bluff the Liberals into keeping net zero. Now, Labor are ruthless at many things, but they know their politics. They know how utterly vulnerable they are to a fair dinkum fight over net zero and its impact on cost of living. Now, if the Liberals were smart, that's the question, is it? If they were smart, they would go hard. But that's the issue. Does the Liberal Party have the ticker to take on Labor and win? I hope I'm wrong. But when their own MPs wrongly think that the Paris Agreement binds us to net zero by 2050, I tell you, some days you've got to wonder.